The ships appeared on a Tuesday morning. 12 massive vessels materialized above Earth like dark mountains hanging in the sky. Each one stretched nearly 5 kilometers long, their hulls black as deep space and covered with weapons that glowed with blue energy. They arranged themselves in a crescent formation above the planet, blocking out the sun for half of Europe. In Geneva, Switzerland, the United Nations Space Command had been preparing for this moment for decades. But preparation and reality were very different things. Director Chen Wei stood at the window of his office, watching the shadows of the alien fleet fall across the city. His coffee had gone cold in his hands. "Sir," his assistant said from the doorway, "they're broadcasting." The message came through on every frequency. Every television, every radio, every phone on Earth carried the same words, translated perfectly into every human language. "People of Earth, you have been found. Prepare to receive the delegation of the Galactic Hegemony. Resistance is not advised." Within 6 hours, a shuttle descended from the largest vessel. It landed on the wide plaza in front of the Palais des Nations, burning a perfect circle into the ancient stones. Security forces from 12 nations surrounded it, their weapons raised but their hands shaking. The shuttle's door opened with a hiss of foreign air. Grand Arbiter Voss's Keth stepped out into Earth sunlight for the first time. He stood 3 meters tall, his body covered in scales that shifted between green and gold as he moved. His eyes were large and yellow, with black slits for pupils. He wore robes of deep purple that seemed to flow like water, and a crown of twisted metal sat upon his head. Behind him came 20 soldiers in gleaming armor, their weapons holstered but clearly visible. Voss Keth had performed this ritual more than 100 times across his long career. He had brought the submission ultimatum to species of every shape and size. He had watched them tremble. He had watched them weep. He had watched them realize that their independence was over. He expected the same from these humans. The security forces parted as Secretary General Maria Santos walked forward to meet him. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, dressed in a simple blue suit. She did not tremble. She did not weep. She simply looked up at the massive alien with the expression of someone greeting a difficult guest at a dinner party. "Welcome to Earth," she said. "I am Maria Santos. I speak for humanity in matters of diplomacy." Voss's Keth studied her with his golden eyes. Her heartbeat was elevated but steady. Her hands did not shake. Interesting, but it would not matter. They all broke eventually. "I am Grand Arbiter Voss's Keth of the Galactic Hegemony," he announced, his voice deep and resonant. "I come bearing the submission ultimatum. You will gather your leaders to hear it." Santos nodded politely. "Of course. We've prepared the General Assembly Hall. Please, follow me." The walk through the Palais des Nations was tense. Human security officers lined every corridor, their faces pale but determined. Voss Keth's soldiers kept their hands near their weapons, but the Grand Arbiter himself seemed almost bored. He had walked through the capitals of 1,000 civilizations. This one was no different. The General Assembly Hall had been modified for the occasion. The usual rows of national delegates remained, but a raised platform had been constructed at the center, large enough for Voss's Keth and his guards. Cameras broadcast the scene to every corner of Earth. 2 billion humans watched as the alien took his place. Secretary General Santos sat in the front row, flanked by the leaders of every major nation. Behind them sat military commanders, scientists, and diplomats from around the world. The hall was silent except for the soft hum of translation devices. Voss's Keth raised his arms, and his voice echoed through the chamber. "People of Earth, I bring greetings from the Galactic Hegemony, the supreme authority of civilized space. For 12,000 years, the hegemony has maintained order across 3 galactic arms. 4,000 species have found their place within our structure. 4,000 worlds have known peace under our guidance." He paused, letting the weight of those numbers sink in. "Your planet has been observed for some time. We have watched your species grow. We have seen your potential. And now, the time has come for you to take your place in the greater community of intelligent life." The human delegates listened in silence. Some were pale with fear. Others had their jaws clenched in anger. But all of them watched the alien with intense focus. Voss Keth continued, his voice growing more powerful. "The submission ultimatum is simple. Your governments will dissolve. Your military forces will disarm. Your resources will be cataloged and distributed according to hegemony needs. In exchange, you will receive protection, technology, and a purpose greater than your primitive tribalism could ever provide. He stepped forward, his golden eyes sweeping across the assembled humans. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. The hegemony has never been refused. Those who have tried now exist only as warnings in our historical archives. His voice rose to its dramatic peak. You face a simple choice, humans. Submit and prosper under our guidance, or resist and be rendered unto ash. Your cities will burn. Your people will scatter. Your very memory will be erased from. He stopped. Someone was laughing. It started small, barely a chuckle from somewhere in the middle rows, but it spread. Another delegate snorted. Someone else covered their mouth, shoulders shaking. Within seconds, laughter rippled through the entire General Assembly. Vosketh stood frozen, his mouth still open mid-threat. In all his centuries of delivering the submission ultimatum, no species had ever laughed. They had cried. They had screamed. They had begged. They had thrown themselves at his feet or tried to attack him in desperate fury. But laughter, his translator device buzzed with confusion, trying to process the emotional context. It failed. The concept did not exist in its database. Secretary General Santos was wiping tears from her eyes, not from fear but from genuine amusement. She held up a hand, trying to compose herself. I apologize, she managed, still chuckling. I apologize. That was very rude. Please continue. You laugh? Vosketh's voice was uncertain for the first time in centuries. I threaten your extinction and you laugh? I'm sorry. Truly. Santos stood up, still smiling. It's just, well, you reminded us of someone. Someone? Many someones, actually. She gestured to the delegates around her. Representatives from every nation on Earth are in this room. Every single one of us comes from a country that has, at some point in history, given almost exactly that speech to another group of humans. A delegate from Britain nodded, a slight smile on his face. The Japanese representative covered a laugh with a cough. The delegates from Spain, France, and Portugal exchanged knowing glances. Submit or be destroyed. Resistance is futile. Your resources belong to us now. Santos counted the phrases off on her fingers. We've been hearing that speech for thousands of years. We've been giving that speech for thousands of years. To each other. Vosketh's translator finally caught up, and he felt a strange sensation he did not recognize. It took him a moment to identify it as confusion. You threaten each other with extinction? Constantly, said the Russian delegate. Throughout all of history, added the Chinese representative. Sometimes twice a century, confirmed the American general. Santos nodded. We've had empires that stretched across continents. We've had wars that killed millions. We've developed weapons that could destroy our entire planet many times over. And we've given exactly the kind of speech you just gave, word for word, to hundreds of other human civilizations over the millennia. She walked toward the platform, looking up at the towering alien. You want to know why we laughed? Because your speech was almost identical to the one the Roman Empire gave to Carthage, to the one the Mongol horde gave to Baghdad, to the one a dozen colonial powers gave to 100 nations. We've heard it all before. We've said it all before. Vosketh felt his certainty cracking, for the first time in living memory. And yet, you still exist. Your species is still here. Yes, Santos smiled, and there was something ancient and knowing in her eyes. We are very, very hard to kill, even for each other, especially for each other. She turned to address the room. The Grand Arbiter of the Galactic Hegemony has come a long way to deliver his message. I think we owe him proper hospitality before we continue this conversation. Tonight, there will be a reception at the Palais. Food, drink, and discussion. She looked back at the alien, who still stood frozen in place. You came here thinking we would be afraid of you. But you have to understand, Grand Arbiter, humanity has spent its entire existence being afraid of itself, compared to what we've done to each other. She shrugged. You're going to have to try a lot harder. The General Assembly erupted in applause, laughter, and the sound of delegates rising to their feet. Vosketh stood alone on the platform, surrounded by his guards, watching the humans celebrate their own dark history like it was a point of pride. His military attaché leaned close. Grand Arbiter, your orders? Voss's Keth said nothing for a long moment. In his entire career, he had never encountered a species that reacted to the ultimatum with amusement. He had never faced beings who seemed to find their own potential extinction funny. These humans were either insane or dangerous beyond measure. Possibly both. We wait, he finally said. We observe. I need to understand what we are dealing with before we proceed. Above the Earth, the hegemony fleet hung in silent menace. But for the first time in 12,000 years, the outcome of a first contact was uncertain, and somewhere in the General Assembly Hall, a human delegate was explaining the concept of dark humor to a very confused alien translator. The reception hall of the Palais des Nations had been transformed for the occasion. Long tables held foods from every continent, arranged in colorful displays that represented humanity's culinary diversity. Soft music played from hidden speakers. Chandeliers cast warm light across the gathering of humans and aliens. Grand Arbiter Voss's Keth stood near the center of the room, surrounded by curious humans who seemed utterly unafraid of his towering presence. His guards remained close, their hands never far from their weapons. But the humans paid them no attention. A waiter approached with a silver tray. Wine, sir? We have selections from France, Italy, California, and Argentina. Voss's Keth stared at the small glasses of red liquid. This is safe for my biology? We had your ship scan your dietary requirements earlier, Secretary General Santos said, appearing at his side. The wine should be compatible. We adjusted the selection accordingly. He took a glass cautiously, sniffing the contents. The scent was complex and unfamiliar. He took a small sip and felt warmth spread through his body. This is fermented plant material? Grapes, Santos confirmed. We crush them, let them rot in controlled conditions, and then drink the results. We've been doing it for thousands of years. You drink rotting plants for pleasure? A nearby human laughed. When you put it that way, it does sound strange. But yes, we also eat moldy bread, fermented milk, and deliberately infected meat products. We call them delicacies. Voss Keth's translator struggled with the concept. The hegemony had strict nutritional standards. The idea of deliberately consuming degraded organic matter was foreign. Santos guided him toward a quieter corner of the room. You seemed unsettled after the assembly. I thought we should talk privately. I was not unsettled, Voss Keth said automatically. Then he paused. I was confused. In 400 years of diplomatic service, I have never encountered a reaction like yours. The laughing, the lack of fear, the casual reference to your own violent history. He studied her with his golden eyes. Most species hide their shameful past. They pretend to be peaceful and enlightened. They beg us to see them as worthy of mercy. Santos sat down in a comfortable chair and gestured for him to join her. He remained standing, too large for human furniture. We tried that approach once, she said. About a century ago, when we first started thinking seriously about alien contact. Some scientists proposed that we should hide our violent history, present ourselves as peaceful, enlightened beings, make ourselves look good. Why did you not? Because it was a lie. And because we realized something important. She looked up at him with those strange, small human eyes. If we lied about who we were, and you found out later, you would never trust us. But if we told you the truth from the beginning, you would know exactly what you were dealing with. Voss's Keth considered this. And what are we dealing with? Santos smiled, and there was something sad in the expression. Survivors. That's what we are. Survivors of ourselves. She stood and walked to a window that looked out over the darkened city. Do you know how many times we've nearly destroyed ourselves? Not metaphorically. Actually, literally come to the edge of extinction by our own hands? I do not. Neither do we. Exactly. We lost count. Nuclear standoffs where the world held its breath for days. Biological weapons that could have wiped out continents. Climate catastrophes that we caused ourselves and then barely managed to reverse. She turned back to face him. We are very good at creating problems, and somehow, against all odds, we are very good at surviving them. Voss's Keth felt that strange sensation again. The uncertainty. You speak of this as though it were an achievement. It is. It's our greatest achievement. Not our art, not our science, not our philosophy. Simply the fact that we're still here. We keep making terrible mistakes, and we keep refusing to die. A commotion across the room drew their attention. A group of human military officers had surrounded several of Voss's Keth's guards, not in confrontation but in animated discussion. One human was drawing something on a napkin while the aliens watched with what might have been confusion. "What are they doing?" Voss Keth asked. Santos squinted. "It looks like General Morrison is explaining the history of trench warfare. He's showing them diagrams of the Western Front." "Trench warfare? One of our many inventions. Millions of soldiers living in holes in the ground, dying by the thousands for a few meters of land. We did that for 4 years straight." Voss Keth's translator provided context, and he felt something like horror creep into his consciousness. Why? Because neither side was willing to surrender. Because we are stubborn. Because once we commit to something, we see it through to the end, no matter the cost. Santos looked at him directly. "That's the species you're threatening to destroy, Grand Arbiter. People who will sit in muddy trenches for years, dying in waves, rather than give up." One of his guards approached, looking disturbed. "Grand Arbiter, the humans have been telling us stories about something called Stalingrad, about something called the Somme, about weapons called nuclear bombs that they used on themselves. We used nuclear weapons twice in actual warfare," Santos confirmed, "on 2 of our own cities. Then we built thousands more and pointed them at each other for decades. We called it mutually assured destruction. If one side attacked, everyone would die. And this prevented war. It prevented that war. We found plenty of other ways to kill each other in the meantime." Voss's Keth's certainty, already cracked, was beginning to crumble. The hegemony had conquered species that surrendered at the first show of force. They had defeated empires that collapsed when their leaders were captured. They had absorbed civilizations that valued their survival above all else. But these humans seemed to value survival and also something else. Something that made them willing to die rather than submit. Something that made them fight hopeless battles and refuse to accept inevitable defeat. "Your species is insane," he said quietly. "Possibly," Santos agreed. "But we prefer to call it determined." A human approached with 2 more glasses of wine. Santos took one and offered the other to Voss's Keth. He accepted it without thinking. "You came here expecting to find a primitive species," she said. "Easy to intimidate. Easy to conquer. You expected us to be like the others." "Yes. And instead you found a species that has been preparing for this moment since before we developed space travel." Voss Keth nearly dropped his wine. "Preparing? Of course. We've been imagining alien invasions for centuries. We've written thousands of stories about it. We've made countless plans for exactly this scenario." Santos sipped her wine calmly. "We have military contingencies for hostile first contact dating back to the 1,950 seconds. We've war-gamed every possible alien invasion strategy. We've developed weapons specifically designed for fighting enemies from space." She smiled again, and this time there was something sharp in it. "You think we were surprised when your fleet appeared? We've been waiting for you, Grand Arbiter. Some of us have been waiting our whole lives." Across the room, another group of humans had begun explaining something to a bewildered alien translator. From the gestures, it appeared to be the concept of guerrilla warfare. Voss Keth watched his carefully trained soldiers looking increasingly uncomfortable as humans cheerfully described the various creative methods their species had developed for killing each other. One human was drawing a diagram of something called a trebuchet. Another was explaining the principles of asymmetric warfare. "You are trying to frighten us," he said to Santos. "This display, these stories. You are trying to make us reconsider. Is it working?" He did not answer. But the fact that he did not immediately say no was answer enough. "We don't want war," Santos said, her voice softening. "We've had enough war to last us forever. But we will not submit to anyone. Not to each other, not to you. That's the one thing we've learned from our terrible history." She finished her wine and set the glass down. "You can destroy our cities. You can burn our countries. You can kill billions of us. But you will never control us. The survivors will fight. Their children will fight. Their grandchildren will fight. We will fight for centuries if we have to. Because that's what we do. That's what we've always done." Voss's Keth looked at the woman standing before him. She was small. She was soft. She had no claws, no scales, no natural weapons of any kind. And yet she spoke of endless war with the calm certainty of someone describing the weather. Other species have made similar claims, he said. They all submitted in the end. Other species didn't spend their entire evolutionary history fighting each other for every scrap of resource on their planet. Other species didn't develop weapons capable of ending all life on their world and then choose not to use them out of pure spite. Santos met his golden eyes without flinching. Other species weren't human. The reception continued around them. Aliens learned about human history and looked increasingly disturbed. Humans cheerfully shared their darkest moments and seemed proud of them. Somewhere, a human was trying to teach an alien guard how to dance. "I will return to my ship," Vosketh said finally. "I must report to my superiors. I must reconsider the situation." "Of course," Santos offered her hand, a human gesture of farewell. "We'll talk again tomorrow. Get some rest." He looked at her small, soft hand for a long moment before reaching out to shake it carefully. Her grip was firm and unafraid. As he walked toward the exit, flanked by his confused and uncomfortable guards, Vosketh heard one human explaining to an alien translator that humanity had once fought a war that killed 60 million people and then, 50 years later, made their former enemies into close allies. "We call it moving on," the human said cheerfully. "We're very good at it. Kill each other by the millions, then share drinks a few decades later. It's just how we work." The translator's device sparked and died from the strain of processing that information. Vosketh left the reception with far more questions than answers. In 400 years of bringing the submission ultimatum to conquered worlds, he had never met a species that treated their own apocalyptic history as a point of pride. These humans were either the most dangerous species in the galaxy or the most insane. As he boarded his shuttle back to the fleet, he suspected they might be both. The War Council chamber of the Eternal Mandate was silent, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. 12 of the hegemony's most experienced officers sat around a curved table, their scales and uniforms reflecting the blue glow of holographic displays. At the head of the table, Grand Arbiter Vosketh stood with his hands clasped behind his back. "Report," he commanded. Strategic Commander Thos's Nar activated the central display. Images of Earth appeared, rotating slowly, with data streams flowing around it like rivers of light. Initial assessment suggested a standard conquest scenario. Thos Nar began. Primitive technology, fractured political structure, no unified military command. Class 4 civilization, at best. And now, the strategic commander's scales shifted to a shade of uncertain gray. "We are revising that assessment." He expanded the display to show Earth's history in accelerated time. Cities rose and fell. Borders shifted like living things. Bright flashes marked wars, revolutions, and disasters. The visual record was chaotic and violent in ways the hegemony had never seen. This species has engaged in over 15,000 documented armed conflicts in the last 5,000 years alone. They have invented methods of warfare that our tacticians find disturbing to contemplate. An image appeared of a mushroom cloud rising over a human city. They developed nuclear weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. Then they built enough of them to do so multiple times over. For nearly half a century, their two largest power groups pointed these weapons at each other, each prepared to end all life on their world if the other attacked. Another officer, cultural analyst Kethala, spoke up. Her voice was troubled. "Their fiction is equally concerning. I have analyzed over 10,000 of their entertainment products dealing with alien invasion scenarios. They have imagined this exact situation countless times." She activated her own display, showing covers of books, posters for films, and pages from documents. They have written detailed guides for resisting technologically superior invaders. They have fictional accounts of successful guerrilla warfare against alien occupiers. They have developed cultural myths around the concept of humanity triumphing against impossible odds. Vosketh studied the images. They prepared themselves through stories. Yes, Grand Arbiter. For centuries, they have been mentally conditioning themselves for the moment when a force like ours would arrive. Their entertainment industry has essentially been a training program for psychological resistance. Thos's Nar brought up a new set of data. Our tactical AI attempted to model a ground invasion of Earth. It returned inconclusive results. Inconclusive? Our AI has predicted the outcomes of 3,000 conquest campaigns with 98% accuracy. Yes, Grand Arbiter. But when modeling human resistance, it encountered variables it could not process. The strategic commander's voice was careful. The AI uses standard behavioral parameters: rational self-preservation, cost-benefit analysis, recognition of inevitable defeat. Humans do not follow these parameters. He displayed a chart showing predicted versus actual outcomes of human conflicts. In multiple instances throughout their history, human forces have continued fighting in situations where defeat was mathematically certain. They have sustained casualties that should have broken their will and instead fought harder. They have sacrificed themselves deliberately to delay enemies or protect others. Another officer, military historian Voss Rell, leaned forward. I have studied their concept of last stands. Battles where human fighters knew they would die but chose to fight anyway, simply to slow an enemy or make a statement. They celebrate these defeats as their greatest victories. They celebrate losing. They celebrate not surrendering. The distinction is important to them. Vosril activated his display, showing images of ruined fortifications and monuments to fallen soldiers. They have built temples to commemorate moments when their warriors chose death over submission. These are sacred places to them. Vosketh felt that unfamiliar sensation again, the uncertainty that had been growing since the General Assembly. What of their current military capabilities? Thosasnar brought up the relevant data with visible reluctance. They have no unified military command, which initially seemed like a weakness. However, this means that conquering one nation does not neutralize the others. Each of their major powers maintains independent armed forces with separate command structures. The display showed military installations scattered across every continent. They have developed weapons specifically designed for combating threats from space, anti-satellite systems, orbital defense platforms currently under construction, deep underground bunkers capable of surviving direct nuclear strikes. The strategic commander paused. They began building these systems over a century ago, before they had any evidence that extraterrestrial threats existed. They built planetary defense systems based on speculation, on imagination, Grand Arbiter. They imagined we might come, and they prepared. Kethala spoke again, her voice soft but troubled. There is another factor. Their psychology is designed for persistence. They evolved on what our classification system would call a death world. High gravity, extreme weather, dangerous fauna, limited resources. Their survival instinct is exceptionally developed. She displayed images of Earth's environment: storms, predators, volcanoes, earthquakes. They are also pack hunters by nature. They form bonds of loyalty that override self-preservation. Our records show instances where humans have died protecting complete strangers. They will sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor and duty and freedom. Vosril nodded. Their history includes multiple instances of conquered populations rising up against occupiers generations after the initial defeat. They have a concept called resistance that seems to exist independent of any realistic hope of success. They resist simply because they refuse to accept domination. The War Council sat in uncomfortable silence. Vossesketh walked slowly around the table, studying each officer in turn. These were veteran commanders who had overseen the conquest of hundreds of worlds. They had crushed empires and broken species, and now they all looked at the image of Earth with expressions that bordered on fear. You are telling me, he said slowly, that this primitive species, with their inferior technology and fractured civilization, represents a genuine threat to the hegemony? Thosasnar chose his words carefully. I am saying that conquering them would be costly beyond any benefit we might gain. Their planet has limited resources. They are not strategically positioned. The value of adding them to the hegemony does not justify the expenditure of forces necessary to truly subjugate them. And if we simply destroy them, then we face a different problem. Kethala brought up a new display. These humans have already begun broadcasting information about our first contact to distant space. They have launched probes and messages in multiple directions. If we destroy them, the galaxy will eventually learn that the hegemony encountered a species and immediately exterminated it. This could inspire resistance in other client species. It could undermine our reputation for inevitable victory. We would become a cautionary tale rather than an inspiration, Vossarel added. the species that was so threatened by primitives that they had to resort to genocide. Vosketh stopped walking. So you advise against conquest and against destruction. What do you advise? The officers exchanged uncertain glances. This was not a situation they had encountered before. The submission ultimatum had always worked. Civilizations submitted, or they were destroyed. And either way, the hegemony continued its expansion. There had never been a third option. Perhaps, Kethala said hesitantly, we could negotiate. Genuinely negotiate, I mean. Not the standard terms of submission, but actual diplomacy. The hegemony does not negotiate. The hegemony has never met a species like this before. She met his golden eyes with surprising courage. Grand Arbiter, I have studied their history extensively. These humans have something we do not fully understand. Something beyond their weapons and their stubbornness. And what is that? Hope. Irrational, persistent, unreasonable hope. They believe they can overcome any obstacle. They believe every setback is temporary. They believe that no matter how badly things go, tomorrow could always be better. She paused. We have conquered species with greater technology, larger populations, and stronger military forces. We have never conquered hope. The War Council chamber fell silent again. Vosketh thought about the reception the previous night, the humans laughing at his threats, their casual references to their own apocalyptic history, the woman who spoke of endless war like she was describing a pleasant afternoon. He thought about the young officer before him, speaking words that would have been treason a month ago, questioning the foundations of hegemony policy. I must consult with the Corps, he said finally. This situation requires guidance from higher authorities. He dismissed the council and stood alone in the chamber, watching Earth spin slowly on the display. Such a small world. Such a troublesome species. For the first time in his long career, Vosketh began to wonder if the hegemony had finally found something it could not conquer. Not through superior force, not through overwhelming technology, but through something far more dangerous. The refusal to accept defeat. He sent his report to the Hegemony Corps with a recommendation he never thought he would make. Delay military action indefinitely. Study this species further. Consider alternative approaches. And in a small corner of his ancient mind, Grand Arbiter Vosketh began to wonder if perhaps the humans had something worth learning about, something worth keeping alive. 3 months had passed since the galactic hegemony arrived above Earth. The orbital station that now housed the ongoing negotiations was a marvel of cooperation. Human engineers had worked alongside hegemony technicians to build a neutral space where both species could meet on equal terms. It floated between Earth and the alien fleet, a symbol of something that had never existed before. Genuine dialogue with an unconquered species. Secretary General Maria Santos looked out the observation window at her home planet, a blue and green marble hanging in the darkness. Behind her, the latest negotiation session had just concluded. For the first time, the humans had not been presented with demands. They had been asked questions. Grand Arbiter Vosketh approached her, his massive form reflected in the glass. Your negotiators are unlike any I have encountered, he said. They do not behave like conquered people bargaining for mercy. That's because we're not conquered, Santos replied simply. And we're not bargaining for mercy. We're having a conversation. A conversation. He tasted the word like it was something new. In 12,000 years, the hegemony has never had a conversation with a potential client species. Then maybe it's time to start. She turned to face him. In 3 months of daily meetings, she had learned to read his alien expressions. The slight shift in his scales that meant curiosity. The angle of his head that indicated genuine interest. The way his golden eyes softened when he was thinking rather than judging. You brought a comedian to today's session, he said. Dr. Patricia Chen. She's a professor of conflict resolution, who also performs stand-up comedy. We thought she might be helpful. She spent 30 minutes making jokes about the hegemony's ceremonial traditions. Did you find them offensive? Vosketh's scales shifted to the color Santos had learned meant embarrassment. I found them funny. Several of my staff were laughing. They tried to hide it, but I noticed. That's the point. Santos smiled. Dr. Chen's specialty is using humor to break down barriers. When people laugh together, they're not enemies anymore, at least for that moment. She walked toward a seating area designed for both human and hegemony physiology. Vosketh followed. lowering himself carefully onto the reinforced furniture. "Your species approaches everything strangely," he said. "You brought historians to explain your failures. You brought philosophers to argue against your own positions. You brought comedians to mock your potential destroyers. We brought ourselves," Santos said. "All of ourselves. Not the polished diplomatic version that hides our flaws. The real version." "Why?" "Because the real version is what you would get if you conquered us. We figured you should know what you were getting into." A door opened, and cultural analyst Kethala entered the room. Unlike most hegemony officers, she had been spending her off-duty hours with human cultural attachés, learning about Earth's history and art. Her scales had taken on a slightly warmer color over the past months. "Secretary General, Grand Arbiter." She nodded to each in greeting. "I apologize for interrupting, but I have something I wish to share." "Please," Santos said. "Join us." Kethala sat down, her movements less rigid than they had been during that first meeting. "I have been studying human history. Specifically, your concept of revolution." "Ah," Santos said. "That's a big topic. It is unlike anything in hegemony records. You have overthrown your own rulers. Multiple times. Throughout your entire history. Sometimes violently, sometimes peacefully, but always with this core belief that power should serve the people, not the other way around." Voss's Keth shifted uncomfortably. "Such ideas are not discussed within the hegemony." "No," Kethala agreed. "They are not, but I cannot stop thinking about them." She looked at Santos with something like hope in her alien eyes. "Your species has changed itself, fundamentally, repeatedly. You have been empires and democracies, monarchies and republics. You have held slaves and then freed them. You have oppressed groups and then granted them equal rights. You keep becoming something different than you were." "We're still working on it," Santos admitted. "We've got a long way to go, but you are still trying. That is what amazes me." Kethala leaned forward. "The hegemony has existed in essentially the same form for 12,000 years. We do not change. We expand. We absorb. We continue. But we do not become anything new." Voss's Keth's voice was sharp. "Kethala, you speak of things that should not be spoken." "I speak of things I have learned from humans," she replied, meeting his eyes without flinching. "They have a saying, 'The only constant is change.' They believe that everything grows, adapts, transforms, including civilizations, including empires." Santos watched the exchange carefully. She had noticed Kethala's transformation over the past months. The young officer had arrived as a loyal analyst studying a potential enemy. She was becoming something else entirely. "The hegemony has endured for 12 millennia, Vosketh said firmly. "Our stability is our strength." "Is it?" Kethala asked. "Or is it stagnation? When did we last create something truly new? When did we last question our own assumptions? The humans question everything, constantly. They argue with each other about the most fundamental aspects of their society. And somehow, this makes them stronger." Santos raised her hand gently. "This isn't a conversation I should be part of. These are questions for your people to answer." "No," Kethala said. "You should be part of it, because you are the ones who showed us these questions exist." She stood and walked to the observation window, looking out at Earth. "I have been reviewing the stories humans tell about alien contact. Not just the violent ones, where you fight and win, but the other kind. Stories where humans meet aliens and learn from each other. Stories where both species change because of the meeting. Where something new is created that neither could have created alone." She turned back to face them. "What if that is why we came here? Not to conquer or absorb or continue as we always have. What if we came here to finally change?" The silence in the room was heavy with implication. Voss's Keth stared at the young officer who was speaking words that had never been spoken in hegemony space, who was questioning traditions that had stood for 12,000 years, who was suggesting that the eternal, unchanging empire might need to become something new. "You speak of transformation," he said slowly. "But transformation is dangerous. Empires that change often fall, and empires that never change eventually die," Santos said softly. "They become so rigid that they shatter. We've seen it happen many times in our own history. Your history is barely a few thousand years old. What do you know of eternal empires?" "Nothing," Santos smiled. But we know about ourselves. We know that the nations that learned to adapt survived. The ones that refused to change became ruins that tourists visit on vacation. Vossesketh was silent for a long moment. The Corps has been sending messages, he finally said. They are displeased with my lack of progress. They want subjugation or destruction. They do not understand why I have delayed. And what have you told them? I have told them that I am still assessing the situation, that these humans are more complex than initial reports suggested, that further study is required. He looked at Santos, and she saw something she had not seen before in his ancient golden eyes. Doubt. Not just about the conquest, but about everything he had believed for 4 centuries. But that is not the truth, is it? She asked gently. No. His voice was barely above a whisper. The truth is that I am no longer certain the hegemony is right. For the first time in my life, I am asking questions that have no approved answers. Cathala moved to stand beside him. You are not alone, Grand Arbiter. There are others in the fleet who feel the same, who have watched humans laugh and argue and celebrate their own terrible history, who have begun to wonder if perhaps there is another way. Another way is treason, or another way is evolution, Santos said. That's what humans call it when something transforms into something better. It's painful, it's terrifying, but it's how life moves forward. She reached out and took Vossesketh's massive clawed hand in her small human one. He did not pull away. You came here to conquer us, she said. But what if you ended up learning from us instead? What if the meeting of our species became something neither of us expected? Not war, not submission, but genuine change. Vosketh looked down at her hand holding his. Such a small, fragile thing. And yet somehow, these small, fragile beings had shaken the foundations of everything he knew. The Corps will not accept this, he said. Then perhaps, Cathala said quietly, it is time for the Corps to change as well. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war against 12,000 years of tradition. And somewhere in the depths of the orbital station, a group of young hegemony officers gathered in secret, discussing human concepts like freedom and revolution and hope. The future was shifting, and for the first time in 12 millennia, no one knew what would come next. The hegemony reinforcement fleet arrived 6 months after first contact. 40 additional warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, their weapons already powered. They arranged themselves around Earth like a noose tightening. Their commander, High Marshal Krosisval, was known throughout the galaxy as the Hammer of the Hegemony. He had never failed to subjugate a world. His message to Grand Arbiter Vosketh was simple. Complete the conquest immediately, or face charges of incompetence and treason. The orbital station where negotiations had been held for months suddenly felt very fragile. Secretary General Maria Santos stood on the observation deck, watching the new fleet take position. Behind her, Vosketh entered quietly. His scales were the color of storm clouds. The deadline is tomorrow morning, he said. By sunrise on your Greenwich time, I must either announce humanity's submission or begin the assault. Santos did not turn around. And what will you do? I do not know. He moved to stand beside her. For the first time in 4 centuries, I do not know. She finally looked at him. In the past months, she had watched this ancient being transform from conquering overlord to something closer to a friend. They had shared meals, stories, and long discussions about the nature of civilization. She had seen him laugh at human jokes and weep at human tragedies. You've changed, she said simply. Yes, you have changed me. Your strange, stubborn, laughing species has changed me in ways I cannot fully understand. He paused. I was supposed to break you. Instead, you broke something in me. Something that perhaps needed to be broken. The door opened again. Cathala entered, followed by a dozen other young hegemony officers. They gathered around Vossesketh with expressions of determination. Grand Arbiter, Cathala said formally, we have been meeting in secret, discussing what we have learned here, the human concepts we have studied. We wish to make a declaration. Vossesketh's scales shifted with surprise. Speak. We no longer believe in the rightness of the hegemony's methods. We have seen another way, a way of negotiation rather than conquest, of learning rather than absorbing, of changing rather than remaining eternally the same. She straightened her posture. If you give the order to attack Earth, we will refuse it. The silence that followed was absolute. You would mutiny, Vosketh said slowly. You would throw away your careers, your futures, possibly your lives. For what? For a species you met 6 months ago? For an idea? Kethala replied. Humans taught us that ideas can be worth dying for. They die for ideas all the time. Freedom, justice, hope. They believe these things are worth more than survival. Santos watched Vosketh struggle with this moment. She could see the war inside him. The loyal officer who had served the hegemony for centuries versus the being who had been touched by something new. The hammer will not accept refusal, he said. Crossval will destroy you without hesitation. Possibly, a young officer said. But perhaps others in the fleet feel as we do. Perhaps the ideas we have learned are already spreading. Perhaps the hegemony is not as unchangeable as it appears. Santos stepped forward. I have something for you. Something I've been saving for this moment. She produced a small data device and handed it to Vosketh. This contains humanity's complete history, unedited. Every atrocity, every failure, every moment of darkness, but also every recovery, every revolution, every time we chose to become something better. He took it carefully. Why give me this now? Because I want you to understand something. Every transformation is painful. Every revolution is terrifying. Every new beginning requires an ending. She met his golden eyes with her own steady gaze. We didn't become what we are by staying the same. We became what we are by constantly destroying what we were and building something new from the ashes. Your history is built on fire and blood. Yes, and also on hope. Always hope. The belief that tomorrow can be different from today. She smiled. That's what we're offering you, Grand Arbiter. Not conquest or submission. Not war or peace. Something bigger. The chance to change. Vosketh held the data device for a long moment. Then he looked at the young officers who had gathered to support an idea that could cost them everything. You asked me earlier what I would do, he said to Santos. I have made my decision. He turned and walked to the communications console. With careful deliberation, he opened a channel to both the Hegemony Fleet and the Hegemony Corps. His voice filled the chamber. This is Grand Arbiter Vosketh. I am transmitting the following message to all vessels and to the Corps itself. I hereby refuse to execute the submission ultimatum against the species known as humanity. Furthermore, I am recommending the establishment of a genuine diplomatic relationship based on mutual respect and exchange. He paused, and his next words carried the weight of 12,000 years. The hegemony has endured by never changing, but perhaps we have endured long enough. Perhaps it is time for something new. I submit the following question to every member of the hegemony, from the Corps to the newest recruit. When did we stop laughing? He closed the channel. The response was immediate. High Marshal Crossval's voice thundered through the station, demanding compliance, threatening destruction. But it was followed by other voices. Captains questioning the order. Officers requesting time to consider. Young voices echoing Kethala's words about freedom and change. The fleet that had arrived as a unified hammer began to fracture. Some ships moved to attack position. Others held back. A few transmitted messages of support for Vosketh. The carefully maintained order of 12 millennia cracked in a matter of hours. As confusion spread through the hegemony forces, Santos found herself standing next to Vosketh again. You've started something, she said. Something that can't be stopped. Yes, I may have destroyed the hegemony, or you may have saved it, by making it become something new. He turned to look at her, and she saw something in his golden eyes that had not been there 6 months ago. Something that looked almost human. You're Dr. Chen, the comedian. She tried to teach me a joke yesterday. Santos smiled. Did she succeed? She said that I needed to understand timing, that the key to humor is knowing when to pause and when to deliver the final line. He paused, scales shifting to a color Santos had never seen before. I believe I am ready to try. Let's hear it. Vosketh straightened to his full height. A grand arbiter, a species of deathworlders, and 12,000 years of tradition walk into a space station. He paused again, clearly counting the beats. The tradition didn't survive the experience. Santos laughed. It wasn't because the joke was particularly good. It was because a being who had come to conquer her world was now standing beside her, trying to be funny, while a galactic empire wrestled with the concept of change. "That's terrible," she said through her laughter. "I know." And then Voss's Keth did something he had never done in 4 centuries of life. He laughed with her, a strange rumbling sound that echoed through the observation deck. Outside, the hegemony fleet remained fractured. The future was uncertain. The next days and weeks would determine whether the galaxy's oldest empire would evolve or shatter. But in that moment, a human and an alien stood side by side, laughing together, while the stars watched in silence. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. And somewhere in the depths of space, the message Voss's Keth had sent continued to spread. The question he had asked echoed across light years, reaching species who had submitted long ago, stirring something that had been sleeping for millennia. When did we stop laughing? Perhaps it was time to remember. Perhaps it was time to start again. And perhaps, just perhaps, a small blue planet full of strange, stubborn, laughing creatures had given the galaxy something it didn't know it needed: the courage to change, the willingness to question, and the simple, transformative power of meeting a threat not with fear, but with the one thing that no conqueror could ever truly defeat: hope.